everybody, and welcome back to another weekly edition of the All Aboard newsletter. So, apologies for the last few weeks. I've been a little bit out of pocket. I had a few weeks of travel. I went to Japan. It was an amazing time. And then I went to New Orleans. And then I went to Las Vegas. And so I feel like I've been traveling for about a month. And 2 weeks ago, I kind of switched it up with some of the videos that I was watching. And last week, I missed the All Aboard newsletter completely. But I am now officially back. I'm not traveling for a few months, and I'm back to building both Peachy Insurance and Next Call Club. And in addition to those two things, I'm back to delivering weekly tips via the All Aboard newsletter. And what we're going to talk about today is one of the most important metrics when it comes to outbound sales. And unfortunately, this is one of the most ignored metrics as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what that metric is, why it's important, and what that metric should be. So with that, let's dive in. Hopefully here to add a bunch of value for you today. All right, guys, here we are. The number one metric that people ignore. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about this metric because if you can focus on this metric, learn how to measure it, and ultimately improve it, it is going to increase your outbound sales success, ultimately increase the amount of business you write, or drastically improve your profitability, or both. So when we think about this metric, right, I want to preface this by saying everybody tells you to focus on closing. We heard about it all the time. You got to ask for the sale. They didn't make it because they just weren't a closer. They couldn't close. They're so good at closing. They are a closer. And everyone tells you to focus on closing, but there's a caveat here. There's a mistake that's made, and that mistake is that there's too much focus at the end of the call. It's about getting the payment information. And don't get me wrong, I get it, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is to get the prospect to buy a product from us. Because if they buy a product from us, we get their payment information, we get paid as well. But so often we are only focusing on the results. And what's happening more and more with agents is that they're starting to focus on the things that lead to sales. It's great. They're focusing on the leading indicators, the lead measures that get us to the sales. And so they say, look, if you ask for the sale or you learn how to close better, you're ultimately going to sell more policies. And that is true. But why don't we put as much focus on the front of the call? Why don't we focus on closing, quote unquote, closing the quote? So many people say you got to close the sale, but they completely ignore what happens when somebody picks up the phone and we don't overcome the objections, okay? So the first thing I just want to kind of talk about here is that the typical success rate when we start digging into this for agents that we work with is 25%, maybe 20, maybe 35, but 25%. What that means is that if they get 10 people to pick up the phone, they're only getting 2 to 3 to take a quote. So the next question ultimately becomes is like, well, what do we expect, right? So we have a huge outbound sales operation. We've always done outbound sales. At any given time, we have 10, 12, 15, 20 plus people on the phone for Peachy Insurance. And we have Next Call Club where we literally are a telemarketing company, right? We have SDRs that we build inside your agency. So what do we expect, okay? So that minimum expectation is 50%. So that means that if 10 people pick up the phone, we expect at least 5 of those 10 people to get quoted. If they are on the front end as an SDR or telemarketer, we expect 5 out of 10 minimum to get transferred to a sales rep. If that transfer if they hang up and they don't get a quote, that doesn't count. So the job of the SDR or the telemarketer is to get somebody over to the sales rep who is ready and willing to talk. Okay, so 50% of the time. Same thing on the sales side. If you don't have SDRs, you don't have telemarketing, and your salespeople call and quote themselves, well, if they get 10 people on the phone, they should get at least 5 of those people to take a quote. Okay, and what's the actual goal, right? Because we just talked about the minimum, but our goal is 70%. So if we get 10 people on the phone, our goal is to get 7 or more of those people transferred or quoted. And I always hear the same types of things. Oh, like, well, what if they already have my carrier? What if I'm Allstate and they already have Allstate? Or, hey, what if they say it's the wrong number? Or, hey, what if they tell me that you're from Farmers and they hate farmers? Well, guess what? That happens all the time. That's just the game. So we build that in. And so if we get 10 people picking up the phone, yeah, maybe 2 or 3 of them are bad numbers. or wrong numbers, I should say, because it's still a pickup, right? A wrong number is still a pickup. Or maybe they say, take me off your list. Or maybe they say, I hate your company. Or maybe they say, I already have your company. That's not happening 50, 60, 70% of the time. And if it is, you either got to work on what you're calling, the leads that you're buying. You've got to listen to what your salespeople are saying, right? Are they telling you that this is the case, or is this actually the case, right? Are you listening to the calls and the objections? Or three, you're calling a list or something that needs to be cleaned up or better. So our goal is 70% or higher. And what I always tell people is that improved transfer rate is improved profitability. Okay. Either you write more business or you are getting more out of the marketing that you are already spending. Okay. And so why do people ignore this? Well, I think for a large proportion of people, they don't know how to measure it, and nobody's ever talked to them about it, And so if you're not used to outbound sales and you've never really done it personally, then you might not think this way. I started as an SDR. I started by cold calling. Not everybody who has an outbound operation started that way. Maybe they've done some in their day, but maybe they weren't a telemarketer or an SDR or didn't have to cold call. And that's okay. That's totally fine. There's a lot of people who have very, very successful outbound operations and they've never done that job themselves. So that's one reason, is they just don't know to watch it. Second, they don't know how to measure it. So they say, well, my phone system doesn't tell me, which ones are picked up and which ones are transferred. That is a known problem. It is very hard for a phone system to discern what is a pickup and what is a voicemail. And so we have to kind of track these things manually. So what we do, just so I can answer this question, because I know it always comes up, is how do we track contact rate? Well, there's a couple ways. One, you can have your callers tally how many pickups they got. It's a little bit old school, but we do an end of day report. That's one way. Second is to use the proper disposition in your CRM. So if somebody calls, picks up the phone and says wrong number, well, you should have a disposition that says wrong number, and that means contact. If somebody says do not call, well, they picked up the phone and said do not call. That's a contact. If you said, hey, they're annoyed or they're not interested, that is still a contact. Okay. So those are good ways to track what is a contact. And then of course, if it's a quote, that should have its own status as well. The third way is less scientific, right? Well, not that the first two are scientific at all, but you can look at your phone system and say, okay, like, well, how long does it take to get to a voicemail? Maybe it's like 45 to 60 seconds. And then you say, well, okay, well, let me look at calls that are 60 seconds to 4 minutes, because that means that we're having a conversation, but it's too short to be a quote or a transfer. If you're tracking your phone system, another way to say is like, okay, well, what are all the calls over 60 seconds? What are the calls that were transferred? And then find the difference. And that can give you the number of contacts. So thinking about these things, this is how we start to measure this, right? So people ignore it for a number of reasons. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they don't know how to measure it. Sometimes just they don't think it's that important. But let me show you some numbers, okay? So the first thing I want to show you is this number on the left, okay? And I'm going to walk through this. There's a lot of numbers here. And if you want this calculator, just shoot me an email back. It's really not very advanced. It's just going to be a very basic Excel sheet that you can punch in, but I'm happy to share it. So let's just say you have a telemarketer. Maybe it's your employee. Maybe it is an outsourced company. Maybe they're in the US. Maybe they're overseas, right? Whatever you want to do. And maybe you have a salesperson that makes 100 calls a day. That's fine. I'm using this for an illustrative purpose with my own agency. It's not uncommon for one of my callers to make about 300 calls a day, sometimes 400, sometimes 200, depends on how many transfers they get. So the first key here is this calls per day number, okay? Calls per day, 300. And then we have 9% answer rate. My click made the one on the right come on, but I'll talk through it. 9% answer rate here. Oh, we got to go back. So 9% answer rate. So if we make 300 calls and 9% of the calls pick up, we get 27 people to pick up. Let's say that we quote or transfer 30% of those 27. That gives us 8 transfers, okay? 8 transfers. And then let's just say that when we do get those quoted, we bundle at a rate of 70%. So that's going to give us just shy of 14 quotes per day. And then let's say we close at 20% item close. Again, I always talk about item close. That is going to be items divided by serious quotes. What that means is that on a 21-day month, this equates to 57 items sold. Okay, at $850 premium per item, which is what my premium is, we are at I didn't do the premium here. And a 25% commission rate with variable comp, right? Maybe if you are an independent, you're in the 12 to 15% range. Maybe if you're a farmer, you're in the 18 to 23 or 24% range with your monthly bonus, right? Like our base comp is, single digits. With variable comp, it's 25% for us in a lot of states. Other states are different, but 25%. So all of these numbers turn into $12,289 of revenue. Okay, not bad, right? So let's now take a look at another scenario. The second scenario is over here on the right. Same number of calls, 300, up here in the top right. Answer rate, 9%. Great. 27% pickups. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Except now we've changed the quote or transfer rate to goal of 70%. Now we have 19 transfers per day. We bundle those at 70%. We have 32 quotes added. 20% close rate is 135 items sold per month. At an $850 premium per item and 25% commission rate, now our revenue is $28,676. That is a difference of $16,000 by bringing the quote/transfer rate from 30% to 70%. And so that is a massive lift, right? And we can't expect to go from 30 to 70% in one day, right? Go to 40, go to 50, go to 60. Start by figuring out where you are. But this hopefully illustrates how important the answer to quote or answer to transfer, whichever one we're thinking about here, same thing, how valuable and important it is to your outbound sales operation. It is extremely common when we work with somebody for internet leads through Next Call Club, they say, oh man, like my quote rate's pretty good this month. It's 12%. And I say, well, I think we can do a lot better than that. I think we should work to improve that. And what is good is relative. So if you buy from 10 vendors and everyone's around 12%, well, that's probably pretty good. If you buy from, 3 vendors and 2 are at 20 and 1's at 10, well, that vendor's probably struggling. But if everybody's at 12, then maybe it's a system issue inside of our agency or our outbound process. So what I always tell people is if you're like 10, 11, 12% quote rate, we should try to get that to 20%. And people say, well, how do we do that? Well, I always tell people, if you're not flagging spam and you're calling your leads properly multiple times over the first, several days, the number one reason that quote rate is low is because leads are picking up the phone and your telemarketer, SDR, salespeople are not converting those pickups to quotes, okay? So this is an extremely important metric. If you need help with any of these things, reach out. I'm happy to give you some tips, via email. If you want formal training for your team, we have sales training for your team. If you need a telemarketer or an SDR, we have telemarketing services. If you need leads, we're happy to help, okay? So I don't want this to be a sales pitch. I do want you to take this to heart. This is an extremely important metric for your outbound sales organization. I hope this helped. Until next week, thanks so much. Bye.